Darien, Illinois. It's the kind of place where people leave their garage doors open all afternoon. A suburb where kids ride bikes down tree-lined streets and neighbors actually borrow sugar from one another. It's quiet, safe, and it's ordinary. Or at least that's what everyone thought. Because in the middle of the night, behind the doors of one of those upscale two-story brick homes, a family's world shattered in a way that made every neighbor lock their doors the next morning. And maybe for the first time in their lives, they wondered if safety was ever anything more than an illusion. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 58 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyrleigha, and I'm here with my co-host, my soon-to-be international travel companion, my husband, Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity is the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness bring to light.
Now, we have a big announcement. I said international travel companion because we're heading to CrimeCon London 2026, and you are all invited. So clear your calendars for the 3rd and 4th of October 2026 because the ultimate true crime event is back. It's bigger, bolder, and more gripping than ever, and we can't wait to join an incredible lineup of true crime speakers, investigators, authors, and of course, fellow true crime enthusiasts. So whether you are deep into every episode or just starting your journey into the world of true crime, this is your chance to connect, to ask questions, and to be part of something truly special.
Or even just come to say hi. We'd love to meet you, and together we can immerse ourselves in a weekend full of discovery, discussion, and advocacy. Just head to crimecon.co.uk to secure your tickets. And don't forget to use our code DARKLIVITY for 10% off CrimeCon London.
And to show them that you want to see us and you want us to keep coming back to CrimeCon. CrimeCon London 2026 is partnered with the True Crime Channel, your trusted home for real stories, real experts, and real investigations. There are platinum and VIP tickets on sale, which give you exclusive access to more content, more FaceTime with CrimeCon casts, and more exclusive benefits, so check it out. And also what I noticed is there are installment plans available across all ticket types, allowing you to spread the cost of your ticket, which makes it easier than ever to join us at CrimeCon UK. And I cannot wait to see you there. We saw so many of you, hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 of you in Denver a couple weeks ago. And wow, what an experience. I can't wait for London. I've never been, so I think it'll be very, very special. Also, just as a little side note, I'm sick today. I don't know if Jonathan is feeling the sickness as well. It's funny because when I'm feeling my best, people will be like, you look tired. And then when I'm sick, people will be like, you look great. So just bear with us today. I'm definitely under the weather, getting the chills and the body aches and stuff. So I'm going to do my best.
You look great.
Aw, thank you. But let's get serious and get into the case for today. It was 3 o'clock in the morning in a quiet suburb of Chicago. Most of the people living in Darien, Illinois were asleep, dreaming of work deadlines, weekend plans, maybe even baseball season coming up. But one young woman was very much awake. She was crouched in the back of her bedroom closet, phone pressed to her ear, and on the other end of the line, a 911 dispatcher is trying to keep her calm. Her voice is barely above a whisper. She says, "There's a shooter in my house. I heard about 10 shots." And she gives her name, Angela. She's 25 years old. And at that exact moment, she doesn't know if her parents or her 2 brothers are alive. And she doesn't know if she's next. All she knows is that someone has broken into their family home in the dead of night and opened fire.
911. I'm in my house. They're shooting. They're shooting. Who's shooting? How many times did you hear shooting? 10 times. 10 times. Do you know where it's coming from? In the house? Yes. I need help. Okay, the officer's on the way. Just stay where you're at, okay?
Minutes after that call, when officers rushed into the Kramer household, what they found would shake this entire community of Darien to its core. But to understand what really happened here, to understand why this family was targeted, we have to go back to the Kramers themselves, Jeffrey and Lori Kramer, and their 3 children. A family that seemed as normal, as suburban, and all-American as they come.
When Lori and Jeffrey Kramer got married in 1980, the world felt wide open. It was the decade of MTV's debut, Pac-Man machines eating quarters in bowling alleys, and couples were slow dancing to Endless Love at their wedding receptions. The Kramers weren't flashy, they weren't famous, but they represented something deeply familiar. Young love in the suburbs, building a life together brick by brick.
Jeffrey was born on September 23, 1959, in Berwyn, Illinois, to his parents Judith and Roy Kramer. He grew up with 2 sisters, Leanne and Beth, and a brother named Gary. Berwyn was a suburb just 8 miles west of downtown Chicago, and it's known for its historic architecture, Chicago-style bungalows, and its ties to the heritage of Route 66. After graduating from Morton West High School, Jeff went on to work for his family's business, Kramer Towing. It's an auto mechanic and tow truck company.
Lori Lee Sfados was born June 22nd of 1961 to her mother Joyce and her father William Sfados. And like her future husband, she was one of 4 children. She also had 2 sisters, Derna and Sandra, and a brother named Billy. Lori was a couple of years younger than Jeffrey, and she grew up in the Cicero, Illinois area, also in Cook County. Cicero is a large, heavily Hispanic suburb of Chicago and well known for its association with mobster Al Capone. Lori, she was an animal lover, she loved gardening, and she was a diehard Chicago Cubs fan. Sports was Lori and Jeff's love language. It's actually what brought them together, even though their teams were rivals. Jeffrey pledged allegiance to the White Sox.
And if you know anything about Chicago baseball, you'd know that this rivalry runs deep because it's not just about different teams, it's more like a religion.
2 different religions, but their love for sports, like many people from the Midwest, is what they look forward to. And it was fun betting against one another. They met as teenagers. Lori was only 19 when they got married.
And Darien, Illinois was the perfect backdrop for the Kramers' dream life. It was a neat middle-class suburb about 20 miles from Chicago with good schools, tree-lined streets, and the kind of close-knit community where neighbors actually knew each other's kids by name. For Lori and Jeff, it wasn't just about building a house, it was about building a family. And over the next few years, their home was filled with this beautiful chaos that only 3 children and that bond of siblings could bring.
Anthony, the oldest, born in 1981. Angela, the only daughter, born in 1984. And Michael, the youngest son, 5 years after that in 1989. They lived in a house devoted to sports, but as we explained, divided. Every summer, when the Crosstown series rolled around, the Kramer household turned into a playful battleground. Dinner table conversations would turn into debates about batting averages and pitching rotations. And like most sports debates, they didn't end with the final inning. They carried on long after the game with them teasing each other and, of course, laughing and joking.
Jeff loved the White Sox, but his real obsession was the Chicago Bears. And by the late 80s, when the Super Bowl Shuffle was still riding the wave of popularity, Jeff was already turning his garage into the go-to spot for Sunday watch parties. He threw open the doors, and the whole neighborhood was invited.
So wait, what's the Super Bowl Shuffle? Because I'm not really familiar with sports, so forgive me, I'm not well versed in it.
Do any of you remember the Super Bowl Shuffle?
Well, I don't. And you're asking them and they're not going to be able to answer right now. So what is it?
Well, it was a song performed by the Chicago Bears football team who called themselves the Shufflin' Crew. The track even earned a Grammy nomination in 1987, though it lost to Kiss by Prince. But still, the Super Bowl Shuffle made it onto the Billboard Hot 100 and was all over the radio, complete with its own music video that everybody seemed to know.
Well, that just shows how much I know, but it was just a little bit before our time. I think I was only 5 years old. So were you even born at that point? My family did not do sports, but let us know, like you said in the comments, if this was something that you grew up to. But Bears games at the Kramer's house became a thing. Neighbors knew the drill. You would hear the game blasting from their living room. You would smell the food grilling in the backyard and see people crowding around the TV, faces painted in navy and orange. Jeff was even known to mow his lawn with a beer in one of his hands, and he was just waving to everyone who passed by.
But Jeff wasn't just a sports fan, he was an incredible host. His parties became legendary in the neighborhood, not because they were elaborate or fancy, but because they were so warm and welcoming. Everyone was invited, and everyone had a plate of food, and everyone walked away feeling like family.
That does sound really fun. Even though I'm not really big into sports, I do love Super Bowl parties, especially watching all the commercials. It's the only time I actually like to sit through them.
It would be fun to do that at our place.
Yeah, I just like that feeling of community. And I think that's why people go to these kind of parties.
And that's who the Kramers were, inviting and genuine. Neighbors often described them as phenomenal. In their cozy upscale subdivision, they were proud to be known as the #1 Chicago Bears fans. But to everyone around them, they were recognized as so much more than that.
They were called wonderful, awesome parents, hardworking people. Jeff even worked hard to keep all of his employees working during the recession when many companies had to lay them off. He even gave his employees and even workers at another auto parts store next to his Christmas gifts every year.
And Jeff was the kind of guy who would fix your car or help you with a leaky pipe and never expect anything in return. People used to say he was the type of guy who would give his shirt right off his own back if it meant helping someone else. One winter morning around 2 a.m., his friend Joe Jacobazi got a flat tire, and the first person he thought to call was Jeff. Without hesitation, Jeff sent someone out right away to fix the tire, and he never asked for a dime. He just understood what it meant to be there for someone.
Right, because he understood what it meant to help people, and he was genuine about it. And I think all of us can say we know at least one person like that you could just call in the middle of the night. And Lori was the mom that you could trust to carpool your kids or slip an extra snack into a lunchbox. And together, they built not just a family, but a reputation. The Kramers weren't just known in Darien, they were loved by everyone that knew them. They were also a good-looking group of people. They kind of reminded me of The Sopranos, except Lori had dark hair. They all did. Dark hair, dark eyes, with Jeff being hardworking in the family business, which let him work with his hands, something he genuinely enjoyed, and he made a very comfortable income to support Lori and the kids, while Lori stayed at home to nurture them. That is until 1999, when Angela was 10 and Michael had just started kindergarten. I feel like a lot of moms feel like, all right, the kids are in school. The last one of them is now in kindergarten. So Lori started working at McGraw-Hill. And you've probably heard of this company before.
Right? They make books like Scholastic or Pearson did.
Exactly. You've probably seen the name on tons of textbooks. They create educational resources from pre-K all the way through higher education. McGraw-Hill Publishing Company was a staple of American education. If you went to school in the 80s or 90s, you probably have one of their textbooks and you had it in your backpack, and maybe you still do. I know my mom still has my textbooks from when I was little. And Lori worked in their Chicago office about 24 minutes away from their home. Now, I didn't tell you much about the actual house that they lived in. So, John, why don't you start?
Their home was located at 8904 Kilkenny Drive in Darien, Illinois. It was a 2-story brick home built in 1998 in the Carriage Greens neighborhood of Terra Hill.
It was stunning and actually expensive back then at $400,000. It was one of the biggest homes on the block and one of the only houses that had a pool in the backyard, which was perfect for their Super Bowl barbecues. It had a long driveway off the street, a 2-car garage on the side of the house, big bay windows in the front, and a nice front yard shaded with trees. And of course, Darien had all the seasons: sunny in the summer, trees bare and leaves falling in the fall and winter, and snow on the ground and ice in the driveway.
And then there were the kids. By 2010, they were all grown. Anthony, the oldest at 29, was still carving out his path in life. He was devoted to his family and still living at home while he figured out whether to step into the family business or branch out on his own. And Angela, at 25, was especially close to her mother. She was bubbly, sensitive, and deeply connected to her family. And by then, she even had a little family of her own, including her young son Nicholas, who was just 13 months old at the time. And Michael, the youngest, only 20, had followed in his dad's footsteps and gone into mechanics. After graduating from Hinsdale South High School, he enrolled in the Universal Technical Institute to sharpen his skills. He was the kind of kid who could spend hours under the hood of a car, grease on his hands, music blasting in the background. And Michael was known for his big, bright smile and unwavering loyalty he showed to his family and friends.
By this time, Lori had actually gone back to college. In 2007, she graduated with her associate's degree from DuPage College, and then she went on to study at Benedictine University to complete her bachelor's degree by 2009. And she was still working at McGraw-Hill and had for the last decade. Jeff had actually bought the family business at this point. He was now the owner of Kramer's Towing, and things were good. Life was good until 3 a.m. on March 2nd of 2010. After everyone in the Kramer household had gone to bed, shots rang out. In the 911 call at 3:10 a.m., Angela Kramer can be heard telling that dispatcher that she was hiding in the closet of her parents' house and that she believed that she heard at least 10 gunshots coming from inside. How terrifying would that be? Can you imagine being alone, being stuck in a closet, whispering into a phone, holding on to hope that you're not next?
That's a very vulnerable position to be in. And she even said, "I need help," which was obvious. It was a race to get to her before the killer did. She was basically begging the operator to hurry up.
Yeah, her saying, "Please hurry up, please." That was like gut-wrenching to listen to. Luckily, the police were there within just a few minutes, but upon their arrival, they witnessed a shadowy figure coming out of the basement window, sliding his body through the hole, making his way up to a standing position just in time for cops to tell him, "Put your hands up now." They had no idea who this man was, but he was clearly trying to escape.
And now guns are drawn, and the man identified himself as Anthony Kramer. He tells them he lives there and has no idea what's going on, but he was woken up to what sounded like gunshots.
They do wonder why he's leaving through a basement window instead of through the house.
But of course, if someone really did hear a commotion the way Anthony claimed he did, it made sense why he wouldn't want to risk his life by moving toward the threat.
Still, the cops can't be sure whether he's running from danger or if he was the threat. He's temporarily detained until they could at least secure the scene and figure out if anyone else was inside and whether they were okay. Now, a quick explanation, because we're going to be showing a portion of a video on the screen, of course, blurred, but this footage was taken for investigative purposes after the cops had already made entry, looked around, assessed the situation, and called homicide investigators to the scene. That's when this video was taken, to memorialize everything for evidentiary purposes, to show what the house looked like that night. And they start with the exterior. But by the time this camera is recording, the sky is much lighter. Here's the Kramers' 2-story brick house, one light on upstairs, everything else dark, except for a few lights on outside of the home. Snow on the ground, bare trees without leaves in the front yard.
So here's the footage as we explain what the cops saw and when they entered the home. They came in through the front door, and once inside, they were standing in the entryway looking toward the living room. To the left was the staircase, and straight ahead was where they found the first victim, an adult male later identified as the man of the house, 50-year-old Jeffrey Kramer. He was lying on his right side in a pool of blood just a few feet from the front door, as if he had been shot while trying to escape to safety. Shell casings were scattered around the floor around him.
It didn't take long to see there was another fatality. On the middle landing of the staircase, there was the lifeless body of an adult female, later identified as the woman of the house, 48-year-old Lori Kramer. She was slumped down as though she was shot as she tried to make sure her husband, of over 29 years, was okay. But sadly, neither one of them made it out of that house alive that night. There were bullet holes lacing the walls behind her. This was shocking for police. 2 homicides in Darien, Illinois. This was a suburb where crime usually meant a stolen bicycle or maybe a mailbox kicked over by a teenager. But this didn't happen here, and the horror wasn't over yet.
So officers continued clearing each room on the first floor, and when they reached the kitchen, they discovered a third victim. It was 20-year-old Michael, found lying in the hallway that led out to the garage, bleeding out on the floor and already deceased. Several knives were scattered on the ground near his body, and a steak knife was still clutched in his hand. It looked as though he tried to defend himself, but stood no chance against a firearm. From there, the officers moved upstairs to the second floor and entered the primary bedroom where Jeff and Lori Kramer had been asleep before the attack. After clearing that room, they made their way into Angela's room, where she was still hiding in the closet. She was terrified she was alone and unsure whether her loved ones were dead or alive.
She was just crouched inside, clutching her cell phone and her small chihuahua, absolutely terrified. The officers let her know, "You're okay. We're here. We're going to protect you." But she was still hesitant to come out of that closet. And I think that I would be scared to face the reality of what awaited outside of that door.
You always hear about, like in movies, where there's a dog involved in some sort of like break-in, and you have to like desperately try to keep the dog quiet from learning of your presence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we know that the truth is absolutely devastating at this point. Her parents and younger brother are dead. They even had to shield her eyes as they walked her downstairs and out the front door. She had to step over her mother's body and walk right past her father lying in a pool of blood. And she wasn't the only young woman that survived that night. Along with her older brother Anthony, another woman, a minor, only 17 years old, came running from a neighbor's house screaming. This was Michael's girlfriend. We're going to call her Sarah for clarity because she was a minor, so her name was not released. She came running up and explained she was inside the house when the chaos unfolded.
She explained that she and Michael had been sleeping on the couch in the living room because he was recovering from surgery. She remembered being jolted awake by a crashing sound, something that to her seemed like a window breaking, and moments later she heard a gunshot and realized that someone was inside this house, firing in her and Michael's direction.
I think it would be so terrifying to be asleep like that, and you're barely awake when you're looking around trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, and the next thing she remembered was hearing Michael scream, "Oh my God."
And at that point, his girlfriend, who we're calling Sarah, said she thought Michael had been shot, so they both ran. Michael ran to the kitchen. She ran out the front door, and she started banging on neighbors' doors until one of them let her in. When she saw the police out in front of the Kramer's home, then she made her way back over. Now she, Angela, and Anthony were being questioned. Of course, they're in tears, they're shaking, they're barely able to speak. But Angela explained that she too was awakened by a loud shatter of glass and then gunshots and her father screaming. And she knew something serious was happening. So she grabbed her phone and her small dog and ran into her closet, barricading herself inside as she called 911. She told police she heard 5 shots, then a pause, and then 5 more shots.
Anthony heard something similar from his room down in the basement. He recalled the sound of glass shattering, then his brother screaming, "Oh my God," and just like Sarah had described, followed by gunshots firing one after another. And at this point, he remembered hearing his father cry out, and then, as Anthony put it, "I heard my mother scream, a scream I had never heard before in my life." More gunshots followed. That's when he bolted to hide under a pool table, clutching his phone and desperately trying to dial 911 several times, but the calls wouldn't go through. He didn't have service in the basement.
All of this is interesting. And of course, police are still skeptical of everyone. They asked what Anthony did next. And he explained that he was just silently waiting there, listening for the door of the basement to open, expecting and dreading that the intruder would come down there and he would be next. Anthony said, "I didn't know who was still alive," which was kind of a weird comment in the moment. And then there was only one way out of the basement, up a set of stairs into the house. So instead, he used the window, which is why he was seen scooting through it as police arrived.
The police then faced the heartbreaking task of telling the 3 survivors that their loved ones hadn't made it. As expected, the news left everyone completely grief-stricken.
Yet Michael's girlfriend told them she wanted to help. She was the only one that got a good look at the shooter, and she said he was dressed in all black gloves, a black mask over his face, just all black clothing, and he appeared to be a white male, average weight, not skinny, but not well built, and average height, not tall, but not short, and not the best description either.
And that's all they had to go on, but they were nowhere near done processing the home for evidence. More officers arrived on the scene, K-9 units scoured the area, homicide investigators worked inside, and all the while, neighbors gathered around the house in their nightgowns and pajamas, lining the edge of the Kramer home. They were desperate to know what had happened, and they were terrified and shaken that their quiet neighborhood had suddenly become a crime scene.
I don't think we stopped to think about what that chaos would look like when it's so close to home.
No.
And there had apparently not been a murder in this area in over 10 years. And once it was confirmed that 3 of the Kramers were dead, no one could believe it. Not this family, because they were the nicest people. They did no wrong. They were caring. And one neighbor even said, this was the last type of family that you would picture this happening to. It made no sense. One neighbor who only lived half a block away from the Kramers said that crime was never an issue in this area. So that made it even more shocking. However, someone did report there had been some break-ins that happened in that neighborhood recently.
And inside, investigators recovered 11 .40 caliber shell casings, and it was noted that all 3 victims had been shot in the midsection and the head. A window had been smashed, leaving shards of glass scattered everywhere, and just beneath the sill lay the window screen and a hammer. This was determined to be the point of entry, right near the living room couch where Michael and his girlfriend had been asleep.
Sure. This was an upscale neighborhood, and sure, this family had tons of electronics and valuables, but nothing appeared to be rummaged through or taken, and the shooting seemed to happen very quickly, as though the killer came there for blood, not possessions, which was even more terrifying, especially for the neighbors. But the chief of police made a statement that morning that there was no ongoing threat. But when they say that, and there's no one in custody, I'm like, how?
Right, but they're saying it as if they know that it's targeted.
Right, it's not random.
So the likelihood that others in that neighborhood would have been attacked were slim to none, since they said it wasn't random.
And I understand that. I just think that early on with so many unknowns, I personally, if I lived there, wouldn't be able to take their word for it. And of course, at this point, they'd ruled out Angela, Anthony, and Michael's girlfriend by then because they all came to the station that morning and they all had formal interviews. No weapons were found on the scene. And then none of them had any signs of a struggle. There was no gunshot residue on them or blood on them. But this wasn't the first time someone close to Angela had been killed.
Tragically, too.
That's right, because her former fiance, 25-year-old Steve Hetman, was killed less than 2 years before this tragedy. She was on the back of her fiance's motorcycle when an SUV swerved out in front of them, and Steve couldn't stop in time. He collided into the back of the SUV and was pinned between the bike and the vehicle. And Angela was thrown off of the motorcycle, severely injured, breaking both of her legs in the accident.
And sadly, Steve didn't make it. The recovery was tough on Angela, losing someone that you thought you were going to marry at such a young age, and then having to go through that physical and emotional pain. It's a lot, and it's heartbreaking for the entire Kramer family.
And through her recovery and the grieving process, Angela ends up getting close with her fiance's best friend, Johnny Borazov. Now, both grieving his loss, they were sharing the pain, they were comforting each other, and they ended up becoming a couple, and that is how Angela's son was born. Now, that relationship didn't last, and Angela was back living at her parents' house and sharing custody of her 13-month-old child when the second tragedy unfolded. I just can't imagine going through so much in just 2 short years.
But of course, once the officers heard that word breakup, they wanted to know all about this Johnny guy.
Of course they did, because they have to work from the inside out. But before they could reach out to Johnny, he calls them. He called 911 around 7 o'clock in the morning, asking to please speak to a police officer. He said, "I just saw the news, and I think my girlfriend's house just got shot up." He was afraid that she was hurt, and he wanted to know more information about what was going on. He said all he knew was that it was being reported that 3 people in that house were dead, and he was freaking out.
What is your emergency? Johnny Borazov. I just saw the news, and I think my girlfriend's house got shot up. Why are you concerned about it? Can I ask? Is that a home invasion or whatever? I don't know. You would like to see an officer? Yeah.
What about their baby, the 13-month-old?
He did mention that their son was safe because it was his time to be with him, and he's unharmed and with Johnny and his parents. So they sent officers over to speak with him in person because, he's close to the family. They're not going to let him know who was murdered over the phone. And secondly, they want as much information as they can get about the family dynamics, his relationship with Angela, everything that he knows, hoping that he could shed some light and possibly give them a direction to go in.
When officers arrived, Johnny told them that he was scared and didn't feel safe after seeing the Kramer home all over the news. The first thing he asked was whether Angela was okay. They assured him that she was unharmed and he was visibly relieved. But then they had to tell him the devastating news that there had been a triple homicide involving Angela's parents and her younger brother, Michael.
Now, hearing this news, Johnny looked shocked, and he proceeded to explain that Michael was a very good friend of his. Then he willingly left and went with officers to make a formal statement and be interviewed at the police station. Now, this is when they get a better backstory on how him and Angela met, which we kind of already explained, through her ex-fiance, who was deceased at this point, Steve, and also how the relationship progressed. They started dating in the fall of 2007, and by April of 2008, they were engaged to be married. Angela found out she was pregnant shortly afterward, at which point she moved into Johnny's house out in Countryside, Illinois, about 20 minutes away from her parents' house. Nicholas was born in January of 2009. Johnny explained that he didn't want to break up with Angela. He still had feelings for her, he still loved her, wanted to be with her. But after the baby came, things got increasingly difficult. And she was leaning heavily on her mother and eventually wanted to move back into her parents' house so she could have more support from her family with the baby. That was around Christmas time. So they agreed to do a split with the baby 50-50. And that's where they were at this point.
When it came to where Johnny was the night of the murders, it was clear that he was nowhere near Angela's parents' house. Actually, he was in a place you really can't hide, a casino.
Yes, and we actually did an entire case about a woman that disappeared from a casino. It's one place with hundreds of cameras, and they aren't usually the grainy, crappy kind of cameras either.
Right, so an officer went down to collect the CCTV footage and confirmed that Johnny and his brother Boris were at the Jolay Casino, about 35 minutes away. Both Boris's statement and the security cameras backed up their alibi. They had been there from 10:30 p.m. until 3:45 a.m. The only time the cameras showed Johnny step away was at 3:26 a.m., where he went out for a cigarette break and was seen talking to a woman near the front entrance before heading back inside. He finally left the casino at 3:45 a.m., and since the murders happened around 3 a.m., while Johnny was clearly on CCTV footage at the casino, they knew they could rule him out. Johnny had already told them point blank that he had nothing to do with what happened.
Yeah, even when they were pressing him pretty hard, which they have to do regardless of, him being on camera, having an alibi, he was crying. He was showing all the appropriate emotions, and he was adamant that he had nothing to do with this. But here's where things take a turn. They have no suspects. And the pressure's on this department to find this killer and arrest them. So they decide they need to hold Johnny at the police station for further questioning because he's the closest to the family. He might have more information, and they're allowed by law to hold a person in custody for at least 72 hours without probable cause or an arrest. But they would have to go before a judge after that 72 hours is passed and get a warrant if they want to continue to hold him. Well, as you can probably imagine, he's not happy. He wants to go back to his son. He wants to go back home and talk to Angela. He wants to find out more about what happened. So he starts yelling at the cops saying, "I didn't do anything wrong. I don't care if you don't believe me."
But why did they hold them? Did they think he knew something?
It is a good question. He wasn't a suspect, but at the same time, investigators were questioning Angela. And she, of course, had a different perspective on him and, of course, their breakup, which isn't uncommon. We know how separations go. Both people see it from their own point of view. And when investigators asked Angela if Johnny was a good guy, she hesitated. And she said, well, he's got his own issues. This is not someone she wants to be with, right? So you're going to get the negative statements. They asked her what kind of issues. And her answer was anger management, which is one of the reasons she left him, on top of the fact that he didn't want her moving out of his place and back in with her family and with the baby. He would beg her not to leave. And remember, he even said he didn't want the breakup. So this was the closest they had for a motive for anyone possibly wanting to harm Angela or her family, even though that's pretty drastic. Still, he was connected. He had anger towards the situation. And Angela even said, if you ever got on Johnny's bad side, you would never be on his good side, as in he holds a grudge. And on one hand, people will say, what's the saying? Like, fool me once,
shame on you.
Fool me twice, shame on me, in that they're not going to be dumb enough to allow someone to hurt them more than once. Some people call it a grudge. Other people call it being cautious.
So he was just a big old red flag.
Yes, exactly.
He and Angela didn't get along, and her family was on her side, so he resented it.
Exactly, which is common in a breakup. Your family usually takes your side. So this is why they were holding him, hoping that he could provide additional information, or maybe they could dig up some dirt on him. And they did find something in his background. He was known to be a small-time dealer in the area. You know what I'm talking about, substances. But as they kept digging, they also found a 911 call from back in April of 2009. And it was actually an argument between Angela and her mother, Lori, which was very interesting.
Records showed that it was so heated that the cops were called. So there were domestics occurring in the family as well, but that's all they knew. No context, but it wouldn't be the first time that a daughter had either tried to harm her own family or had someone harm her family, so they needed to look into all angles.
Especially because families look different from the outside. They could look like this beautiful all-American family getting along, but now with this 911 call, they're like, is there more to the story?
But all of that was suddenly put on hold when the police got their first real lead in the case. A call came in to the station from a man named Jake Guziek, who told the officers that his former roommate, 23-year-old Jacob Nadarsi, had just called him in a panic. Jacob was freaking out, saying that something was wrong and the cops were following him around. Specifically, he said that black SUVs were following him around and was convinced that they were after him.
Why didn't they do it? Driving on the highway, heading towards Florida on I-75, and there's been, like, 7 cars or so that are constantly flashing their lights, and there's people behind me, chased by some random cars for a long time in Indiana. I have a feeling that they're cops, their brother or something. I don't know what the hell's going on. Is there anything you can tell me? I'm unaware. Everything done at this point in time. Thank you.
He was crying, he sounded completely distraught, and even told Jake that this might be the last time he would ever get to talk to him.
Why was this the last time he would ever get to talk to him, though?
Well, detectives asked exactly that. They asked Jake why. They were like, did Jacob say why he was scared or why this would be the last time that you talked to him? And Jake said no, but Jacob had been depressed for a long time.
What did he say? I'm like, well, we just think, I guess, it's Jake. I'm kind of freaking out right now. I feel like something's wrong. I'm driving on the highway and I feel like there's nothing but cops around me. From the sound of his voice, it sounded like he was crying. And he's like, well, this might be the last time I ever, get to talk to you and stuff. Did you ask why? No. Darcy's always been depressed. What do you think's going on? I mean, I don't want to say he's whatever part of this, but if he had a hand in whatever happened, then he wouldn't handle it. He wouldn't be able to live with himself after it.
Okay, so he was possibly in danger of self-harm.
Yes, possibly, but there was something else. Actually, 2 things. First, Jacob told Jake that he had written a letter for his sister, and he said that he was on his way to Florida to protect her. Again, there wasn't much context to what Jacob meant, and the second reason his former roommate called police wasn't just because Jacob was saying strange things. It was because Jacob had a direct connection to one of the victims in the Kramer family, Michael Kramer. The two had been close friends for about 4 years. Both were into auto mechanics, both were studying to become professionals in that field, and they would spend a lot of time hanging out together at Jacob's apartment. Everything had been good between them until Thanksgiving of 2009, just a few months earlier. That's when Michael and Jacob got into a major fight, and the fallout was so bad that Jacob ended up being kicked out of his own apartment.
So now they have a motive. But again, no context as to what this fight was about, why it happened, but they wanted to know as much as they could about this Jacob Nadarcy guy.
On paper, Jacob seemed like an unlikely suspect. He had roots in the same world as Michael's dad, Jeffrey Kramer. They both like cars, and back in the fall of 2005, he landed a job as a technician at the BMW dealership, while also taking classes at community college. He eventually graduated from the Technology Center of DuPage, and back in 2008, the Daily Herald even featured Jacob in a write-up titled DuPage Tech Students Cover Auto Show with the Pros. He was highlighted as one of the only 2 alumni from the Technology Center of DuPage invited to participate in the auto show. This was through the Automotive Youth Educational Systems Program, a partnership between major manufacturers, local dealerships, and high school auto programs, all designed to inspire young people to pursue careers in the auto service industry.
This isn't our industry, but for people like this, it's a really big deal for them. Students like Jacob weren't just there to gawk at the latest cars. They were paired up with manufacturers to evaluate new products and even provide feedback from marketing firms. Jacob was being recognized as a success story, someone who had gone from DuPage tech classrooms to working in professional dealerships, and now he was serving as an example for the next wave of aspiring mechanics. He was going places, a career path, opportunities, connections in the auto world. He had every reason to thrive. This was the same industry Michael and his father were in. So investigators wondered if there was some kind of competition between Jacob and Michael. They're close in the same age. Maybe something that went too far. A job they're both trying to get. Or maybe Jacob wanted to work at Kramer's Towing and he didn't get the job. They needed to dig deeper.
They uncovered the truth that beneath that polished moment at the auto show was a completely different Jacob, one who was unraveling under the weight of addiction, depression, and destructive choices. The apartment that Jacob lived in was less of a home and more of a chaotic party house, with 20 or so people cycling in and out any given night. There was beer, there was weed, and there were endless late nights. Then came the Vicodin prescriptions, which started with a bacterial infection but quickly spiraled into a dependency. And from there, Jacob turned to illegal pills: oxy, Percocet, methadone, and eventually even heroin.
Sadly, this is a story that we've heard many times before. What starts as pain relief ends up becoming a destructive lifestyle. And by 2009, Jacob's world was crumbling. His longtime girlfriend cheated on him with one of his roommates. His youngest sister was attacked and violated, leaving him with guilt and grief. Friends of his were dying. His spiral was obvious to those closest to him. He was smart, people said, but deeply depressed. And of course, the connection that now raised red flags: Michael Kramer. Detectives knew they had to track Jacob down, so they alerted the U.S. Marshals Service.
Sounds like a drug-induced psychotic break.
That's what they feared, and that he was possibly going to harm more people if he was the killer. Now, he didn't have a criminal record. They pulled all of his records and got his cell phone number, and it turned out to be a burner phone, which was another red flag. But calling it was no use. The phone was either turned off or destroyed by that point, so they kept digging. They really needed to know who he was and what he was capable of. What they gathered was more and more concerning. First, they tracked down his grandparents who lived locally, and they were fully cooperative. They actually told the detectives that Jacob was close with them, that he was a really good kid, definitely not capable of these crimes. His grandma just had dinner with him on Sunday night, only a couple days before the murders, and she said he was happy, acting normally, and that he was a mild-mannered and respectful young man. He loved his younger sister, he was protective over her, but his childhood wasn't great.
His grandparents explained that Jacob's mother and father were strict Jehovah's Witnesses who pushed their beliefs on him to an extreme way. He was basically forced to stay at home all the time, not allowed to socialize with other kids his age, make friends, or take part in sports or extracurricular activities because his parents believed that anyone outside of their faith was a bad influence. They even went as far as throwing away his prized possessions, constantly trashing his CDs and DVDs, calling them evil. All this created a very hostile and suffocating environment for him growing up.
It wasn't just that, it got physical. Jacob was beaten by both of his parents, and this led to him engaging in risky behaviors, even self-harm with a knife on his arm, and eventually substances, starting with marijuana and alcohol as early as middle school. And as you can imagine, it had a profound effect on him. Finally, when he turned 18, he moved away from Fort Myers, Florida to his grandparents in Illinois, and things were starting to look up for him at first. But now he's on the run. And before that burner phone was turned off, it was indeed pinging towards Florida. It was tracked in Indiana, Kentucky, even Georgia.
The fact that he was fleeing speaks for itself.
Well, yes, it does, but he also planned to leave before the murders. He actually informed his workplace that he was moving back home. He quit his job back on February 25th, a week before the Kramers were murdered, and his reason was that people were trying to kill him. So was he running because he was the killer or because he thought he was next? They didn't know. But eventually, U.S. Marshals tracked down his family in Florida, and they admitted they met him in Tampa Bay, picked him up in their truck, drove him to their home, and he fell asleep on the way. So you know what they did? They let him sleep. And they said that's where you can find him, out in the truck in the front yard.
And on the morning of Thursday, March 4th, Jacob woke up to U.S. Marshals knocking on his truck window. Guns were drawn, agents surrounding his vehicle, and they shouted commands at him. But Jacob didn't run. He didn't put up a fight. He simply stepped out of the truck and quietly raised his hands in the air. Around that same time, detectives confirmed to the marshals that Jacob had purchased a .40 caliber Glock on February 22nd and picked it up on February 25th.
After the mandatory 3-day hold.
That's right, and that was the very same day that he quit his job, saying that people were out to get him and that he needed to protect himself and his family.
So of course they pull the CCTV footage, and there he is. He's walking around calm, looking around the store, perusing the sports store, even holding the gun, looking at it, and eventually purchasing it just days before the murders. And this is the same caliber weapon used to kill the Kramers. So the question became, were the Kramers the threat? Did he think that they were trying to kill him? And were they? No one could be sure, but from the evidence, it did look like Jacob was their prime suspect. However, he had no weapons on him when they took him into custody, and he wasn't admitting to anything. And they still didn't have a clear motive or direct evidence connecting him to this crime.
But at this time, they thought the motive may not be that important and that maybe it was really as simple as a friend turning into an enemy.
Exactly. You don't even need to prove the motive. He was flown back to Chicago and was being interviewed.
So at this point, they're still holding Johnny.
They are still holding him, but now they have a reason to do so, something they need to explore. When they get a search warrant for the burner phone, the one that belonged to Jacob, he had made a phone call to Johnny, specifically right after the murders occurred. So they get a search warrant for Johnny's phone, and there's a voicemail on it. It's a message that Jacob left for him, which was odd. It's Jacob, and he's saying, "Hi, it's Jake. I'm going to have to get rid of this phone soon. I've got black SUVs following me, man. If you're a friend, you'll call me back." The thing is, we already know Jacob was calling his friends. Recall his former roommate? And he told him the same thing, that cops were after him, specifically black SUVs. And we're hearing the same thing on Johnny's voicemail, a call that he didn't even answer. Johnny and Jacob are also friends. They used to hang out and party together mainly because Johnny was a supplier for their party favors.
So they want to know if Johnny has more to do with this or if they were purely just friends.
That's what they have to dig into because they're like, oh, that's weird. He's calling his phone.
And at this time, investigators were still speaking with Angela and other friends of Jacob's when they learned that Michael Kramer, Angela's brother, who was now deceased, had started to notice Jacob's growing drug habit. Michael began pressing him with tough questions, wanting to know where Jacob was getting his supply, and more importantly, who was supplying it to him. Michael wanted it to stop, but Jacob wouldn't give him any answers.
And that's because he promised Johnny that he would be discreet about his business dealings.
Especially since Johnny worked with and was involved in shady people.
I mean, most people who are in that business are.
And over time, Jacob and Johnny had actually become friends. They'd go out together to bars and restaurants, and other people connected to Johnny's business had seen them together. They knew what Jacob looked like.
Right, and that means it would put him at risk. Jacob was made aware that Johnny was part of a criminal organization. Powerful people, bad people. They received payouts from casinos and committed crimes like extortion and murder. These were not people that you wanted to mess with. Even to get into this business, they had to commit murders. Now, Johnny, not him. He was small time, but these higher ups were people that Jacob had been introduced to, individuals that handled the distribution of the substances to Johnny for him to go sell. So it was, the hierarchy. It was a web of different men, rankings, and authority. And Johnny made it very clear to Jacob, he was never to discuss any aspect of the organization to anyone or ever even talk to the men that he met. There was a Mitch, a Tony, Dino, Frank, a John, and a bouncer that went by Capri, no last names. But they knew Jacob's face, so he knew not to talk.
But did he talk?
Actually, yes, he did talk. It turns out that was what that fight was about on Thanksgiving. Remember the one that Jacob got kicked out of his apartment over? Well, Jacob and Michael had been drinking at Jacob's apartment, and he finally made a confession to his really close friend. He's like, Michael, I lied to you. I want to tell you who my dealer is. It's Johnny. And I'm sorry that I kept this from you all this time. Well, Michael was livid, not just because he valued the truth, but because he hated that Jacob was being pumped with substances. This was his really good friend. And because by that point, his sister Angela was in a toxic relationship with Johnny. She was trying to leave him. And Michael explained to Jacob, Johnny had mistreated his sister, caused their family so much stress, and told him the whole story of Angela and Johnny's relationship, starting with the fact that they met at a really vulnerable time for Angela when she was physically and emotionally recovering from that motorcycle accident that her fiance had died from. And Johnny had just jumped in and over time became possessive of her, to the point that even her own family wasn't allowed to be close to her. She moved into Johnny's house with him, and that was one of the first ways he controlled her. He wanted to be her number one. And this was all Michael telling Jacob.
It sounded extreme, like it was hitting a boiling point during Angela's pregnancy, because in Johnny's eyes, it was their baby, and he didn't like that Angela wanted to include her mother in things like doctor's appointments.
Which is a huge red flag, and also just weird. That's a time when most women want their mother around. That's her first grandchild. And maybe not always, but a lot of women want that support of their mother, especially during pregnancy.
Well, Johnny had a big problem with that and wouldn't let Lori come to the doctor's appointments, which included the gender reveal, and so words were exchanged, tensions were high, and it didn't stop. After the baby was born, it actually got worse. Johnny would use baby Nicholas against Angela's parents, specifically Lori, threatening to take him away and never let them see him again. He would even say things like, "I hate you, bitch. I hope you die."
I mean, that is more than extreme. It's too much. And of course, this was in March of 2009 when the baby was only about a month old. And Lori wasn't quiet about it either. She reacted. She called him a sociopath. And it wasn't the first time or the last time that Johnny would say that he hoped Angela's parents would die. How could you say that to someone else's parents? I mean, how can you say that to anyone? All her parents wanted was to be close to their daughter and be part of their grandchild's life.
And it wasn't just Angela's mom. Her dad ended up facing Johnny's wrath too. A month later, in April, Angela's dad offered to tow away her old car. It wasn't running anymore and had just been sitting outside of Johnny's house. The car was actually a gift Jeff had given to his daughter.
Yeah, this car was one that Jeff initially owned, and now essentially he's doing them a favor by towing it off the property because it's no longer drivable. Well, Johnny had a problem with that because he had put money into trying to get it fixed over the course of the last few months. He was offended that Angela was turning to her dad to solve the problem. It was belittling to him, emasculating to him, and it caused almost a physical altercation between Johnny and Jeff. He pushed Jeff, he pulled out a knife, he wielded it, he walked towards him, and he said, "I'm going to kill you. I hate you." And the cops had to come. Johnny was detained, but ultimately no charges were pressed against him, and he was released.
Well, that dude definitely sounds unhinged.
He does. And from the beginning, Angela had already told the investigators that he had an anger management problem. But it was looking to be a lot worse than that. The very next month in May of 2009, so this was an every few week occurrence with him, there was a baby shower. It was kind of a party to celebrate Nicholas's birth, and it was being held by Angela's grandma, Joyce. It was ladies only, just the girls. And baby Nicholas, of course, who was just 3 months old. A family tradition, not uncommon for it to just be all women. But Johnny again took offense and refused to allow Angela to go unless he came with her.
And if that wasn't bad enough, while they were there celebrating the birth of their son and having a good time, Angela's mom, Lori, asked to hold baby Nicholas. And Johnny was watching her like a hawk.
It's so strange to me that he's acting like these people are enemies.
Exactly. He held on so tightly to that baby, he didn't want to let anyone touch him.
So there are parents who do believe, and I'm not saying Johnny was one of them, but there are parents who believe that no one should hold newborns, that they don't have a good immune system. And I remember with my first baby, Shyla, I kept her away from people for a good couple months. But the baby was 3 months old, and that wasn't Johnny's reason. He had this possessiveness over not just Angela, but also Nicholas.
Lori had just innocently come over, wanting to hold her grandson, when Johnny suddenly jumped up, screamed in her face, and shouted, "I control who holds my son." Lori was already holding little Nicholas, and Johnny snatched the baby from her arms, forcefully putting him into the carrier before storming out the front door.
Angela's poor grandma is trying to de-escalate the situation, and she's yelling. She's like, Johnny, come back. Just calm down. It's going to be okay. And as Joyce is approaching with Lori trying to talk Johnny down, he's using the car seat, the baby carrier, as a weapon. He's using it to push them out of his way with a 3-month-old inside. I mean, that is unreal to me.
It was enough to give Lori and Joyce actual bruises.
Yeah, it was forceful and violent, and the police were called again. They were able to de-escalate the situation, and Johnny finally calmed down. At which point, Angela told him, "We're never going to work out together because you can't get along with my family. You need to work it out." And he was like, "No, I don't care who they are. There's no way I'm ever going to see them again." And he did not want his son to be anywhere around them. Once again, no arrest was made. Everything kind of goes back the way it was before until the next outburst. And there were plenty. It was actually that summer when Jacob and Johnny met, just to give you the complete timeline. I hope this doesn't get confusing for all of you because I know there's a few names going to be said over and over again. We've got Jacob, we got Michael, and we got Johnny. So we're just going to put their faces up on the screen and kind of just tell you who they are real quick. So take a look. And so you won't be confused going forward as we explain what happens next.
Jacob was really good friends with Michael, and right away he told Jacob, "Oh, I'm dating Michael's sister Angela, and I don't get along with Michael." And of course, they didn't get along because Michael was standing up for his family. He didn't like the way Johnny treated his mom, his dad, or his sister.
And Johnny was like, "You probably don't want to tell Michael that you're friends with me. That would not go over well." And remember, Michael's concerned about how much substances his best friend Jacob was doing, and he was wanting to know where he was getting it from. He had a sneaking suspicion it was Johnny because he was the one in that area that was supplying people. But Jacob kept his mouth shut. He didn't want to get involved in the shady business stuff or blowing Johnny's cover. So he kept lying to Michael again and again. That is, until the night before Thanksgiving in 2009, when they got into that huge argument after Jacob came clean and said he was dishonest. Surprisingly, Michael laced into him. He was yelling profanities. He felt betrayed. Yet another person under Johnny's spell, someone that Johnny was trying to control. Michael had known Jacob longer. They were best friends. He had been lied to, and he was livid.
Then, right at that moment, Jacob's phone rang, and it was Johnny calling. Jacob didn't answer, and Michael demanded that he hand over the phone. When Jacob refused, Michael yelled that he'd beat his ass if he didn't give it up. So Jacob finally handed it over. And Michael answered the call himself and immediately started screaming at Johnny.
Let's also remember, Michael's only 20, Jacob is 23, and Johnny's 27. I think age does matter sometimes when you think about what's important to people in their early 20s and how someone a little older can be influential.
Well, regardless of their ages, Michael took Johnny's actions toward his sister and family very seriously. And he absolutely hated Johnny, and that came through loud and clear during that phone call. He cursed at him, threatened to shoot him in the head, and even said something along the lines of, "I'm going to be raising your son for you." Of course, that kind of comment was extremely triggering for Johnny.
Right. He was basically saying, like, my sister is not going to give back your son. My family's going to help raise it. And that was the point. Michael was trying to upset him after everything he had done.
And then the last thing Michael shouted at Johnny was, "Feel free to come over here. I'm going to kill your ass." After that, he tossed the phone back to Jacob. When Jacob got back on the line, Johnny was furious. He told Jacob that he was armed and on his way to the apartment, and that he was going to kill Michael. Jacob later said that in total, the two of them threatened to kill each other at least 30 times that night.
And at that point, Michael called his sister Angela, who was still living with Johnny. But Johnny wasn't home. Angela was there with the baby alone, who had 104 fever. He was very sick. It was pretty much in the middle of the night, and she's awakened to this call from her brother, and he's upset. He's trying to explain what just happened. He's asking, "Where's Johnny?" She says, "I don't know." But about 10 minutes later, Angela gets a call from Johnny himself. He tells her he's heading to where her brother Michael is right now, and he better watch it. I'm sure all of this is frightening for Angela and for Michael and Jacob. But then some time passes, and around 5 o'clock in the morning, Johnny's car pulls into his driveway. Him and Jacob get out, they go inside, and Johnny proceeds to have Jacob confront Angela about how bad her brother Michael is. Telling Jacob, "Tell Angela how Michael was acting, how he was threatening to kill me." Basically, what he wanted him to do was vouch that, Michael was the bad person, blaming everything on him, like it was all him. Nothing else happened that night, though.
By the next morning, Jacob's roommates had enough. They were all friends with Michael, and after that explosive incident, they kicked Jacob out. And luckily for him, Johnny came to the rescue. He set Jacob up with an apartment to rent from his uncle. That probably left Jacob feeling like he was a little indebted to Johnny.
Oh, he did. And he was scared of him. And now he has no friends. His roommates don't like him. Michael doesn't want to talk to him. He had no place to live because everyone was mad at him. So Johnny was his only choice, and now he was relying on him.
That sounds like classic coercive control.
Yes, and it happens to men, and not just in romantic relationships either. Case in point. After Thanksgiving, the tensions escalated between Angela and Johnny. As we told you, by December, they had finally broken up and she had moved out. She had enough after Johnny would not allow her to have Christmas with her family and the baby. As she's trying to leave, Johnny's threatening her. He's saying, "You can go, but you're not taking away my kid." And then he added, "Next time you see your family, it's going to be in body bags." Damn. However, those were just words, things said in the heat of the moment. And after another cool down, The two of them agreed to be civil, and that's when they made the informal agreement to split custody. That was when Angela moved back in with her family in Darien.
And while all this was happening, Johnny was begging Angela to come home, to come back to his place and be a family again. And at this time, though, her mother Lori was meeting a family law attorney to help Angela pursue full custody of baby Nicholas. And Johnny had no idea this meeting was happening at all. Angela did her best to keep things calm, but every time she went to exchange the baby, Johnny would threaten her. He told her that she had to move back in with him or he'd throw out all her belongings. She refused.
Right. He's doing the classic behavior. He's telling her like, oh, come be a family with me again. She's trying to keep it cool.
She didn't want to.
Right. But she knew she had to keep it cool because behind the scenes, they were really trying to get even further away from him. Then when she came to pick up Nicholas the next day, Johnny had thrown all of her things out of the house onto the street. He was yelling profanities at her. He was being loud and obnoxious. And Angela started recording this on her phone as evidence against him for future court orders, which is what an attorney would tell you to do. She documented that he was an unfit parent. And after this incident, she actually went right to the attorney's office and formally filed for sole custody. That was on January 13th. Of 2010. And the next day, her mom, Lori, was in fear for her safety. She was thinking that Johnny would retaliate. So she spoke with security at McGraw-Hill. She told them Angela is in a custody battle, and she thought Johnny might, in her words, come pay her a visit at the office. She said that Johnny knew exactly where she sat, and he'd been combative before, and she knew that he was going to make her family miserable in this child custody process. And as I'm reading all this, I'm like, it angers me so much to know that this is normal for so many people.
I feel like I've heard it that a lot of companies would rather fire you than like have your back.
Oh, yeah. I was just talking about the fact that like they can't get along and there's this like contentious divorce or even separation. They're not even divorcing, but this back and forth. But you're right. I mean, some companies will be like, I don't want the drama. Yeah. But then again, by law, they can't just like fire you over that. They do have a, reasonable degree of protection available for employees. And that's what happened. They were like, we'll make sure he doesn't come in here. And I do have my personal thoughts, of course, about these contentious custody battles, but I'm going to hold off. But if any of you want to post comments below, please do, and I will answer.
So on the same day, Lori went to security. She followed up with an email to put everything in writing. Her concerns, the details about what they talked about, and even a picture of Johnny. And security confirmed that he would not be allowed to enter the building.
And this was all the information investigators had gathered at this point. I also want to make a comment that is very smart to follow up these kind of situations, conversations with something in writing. We remember Amy's case, Amy Harwick. Yeah. She wrote herself an email explaining how scared she was because you need to document that in writing somewhere, especially somewhere that can't be ripped up, thrown away. So email to yourself. This was to security, but to yourself is even a good plan.
And this is overwhelming evidence that Johnny hated that family and he wanted them dead.
And the investigators know now that he was close with Jacob. So even though they knew he had an alibi at the casino, that didn't mean that he hadn't conspired with Jacob to harm Angela's family. That's what they wanted to get out of Jacob at this point in the interview. And we told you he wasn't talking. Well, at least not about the murders. He hadn't slept in days. He had been in a substance-filled haze. He was exhausted. And that's why he passed out in his family's vehicle and they just left him outside all night. So investigators started right there. They were like, why did you leave Illinois? And that's smart of these investigators to kind of start small, try to get it out of him. They told him, you have a good job, you have ties to the community, you have friends. So what made you go to Florida? And it started to come out. He was scared of the repercussions if he opened his mouth. That's what he said, that he would be in danger and that his family would be harmed.
And the investigators tried to play buddy-buddy with him. They told him, don't worry, we will protect you. The only way you're going to be safe, though, is if you tell us everything so we can shield you from whatever danger you're in.
All Jacob could say was, oh my God, this is awful. But eventually, he began to spill.
Starting with, he had no choice in that once it was set into motion, there was no turning back.
So essentially, he was admitting that he killed the Kramers.
Yes, but only because that was the only way he could protect his own family. The investigators wanted to understand who was telling him he was in danger. But can you guess?
Johnny.
Yes. I mean, investigators were already on to him, but They just needed a confession.
But they also needed proof.
Right. And what Jacob was saying was that Johnny himself wasn't the threat. It was the people Johnny worked for. He explained that after Johnny's relationship with Angela deteriorated in December, Johnny told him that Angela had given police information about several of his criminal associates and their illicit activities.
And those members were really upset because Angela supposedly knew more than she was supposed to, and they thought that Jacob was responsible for feeding information to Michael that ended up getting back to Angela.
So Jacob was terrified, but Johnny reassured him. He told Jacob that he had vouched for him, even going as far as to lie to his associates by saying that Jacob was one of them.
That he too had been initiated into the organization, meaning, in plain English, Johnny was telling Jacob, don't worry, bro. I told the bad guys that you were a bad guy too, that you killed people and that there was dirt on you. So he tried to level the playing field.
Not only that, Johnny told Jacob that there had been an informant sent over to his old apartment. And while there, Michael was overheard talking about how he wanted to kill Jacob so he wouldn't be able to testify against him in the upcoming custody hearing over the Thanksgiving incident.
Exactly. Johnny's like, you're going to be a key witness. Michael is trying to get you killed so that you'll never be under oath and admit to how Michael threatened my life. So Johnny's just giving him this whole story. The fact Jacob was being roped into this custody battle was apparently upsetting Johnny's criminal associates as well, according to Johnny. They were pissed at Michael and Angela for going to the police, and Johnny had evidence to prove it. He takes out these papers. He shows them to Jacob. They have, their legal documents with the official heading on them from the court. And there's a list of names on there, starting with Jacob's, followed by names of other people that Jacob knew to be associates that he'd met in the past from the organization. And it included a guy named John. And Johnny explained, John's kids, they were just removed from his home and put into foster care because of Michael and Angela.
Wow.
He went on to explain that Michael and Angela provided police with information on where substances could be found in John's car. And it wasn't long before everyone on that list, including Jacob, was going to be in danger or in jail. And that's when Johnny told Jacob he had been ordered to get rid of Michael and Angela. But he couldn't do it himself. There was just no way. It was too risky since, he was the one in the legal battle with Angela. It would be way too obvious. But someone had to do it. And the associates didn't know why that someone couldn't be Jacob. Because remember, they believed that he had killed before.
And Johnny told Jacob that he was scared that if Jacob didn't kill Michael and Angela, his associates would go after Jacob's family instead. And to drive a point home, he even showed Jacob a printed piece of paper with a screenshot of his sister's Facebook profile on it. Proof that his associates knew exactly who she was.
And to make matters worse and rub salt in an already open wound, because we told you Jacob's younger sister had recently been violated and Jacob was very distressed over it, and Johnny knew that. So you know what he said?
He was like, when the associates saw her, they started making comments.
They were like, oh, she's so pretty. I want to get to know her. I'm interested in her. Yikes. And at this point, Jacob's head is being filled with all this stuff. He's terrified and his head was spinning, as I'm sure many of yours are too. But Jacob was also being provided with a steady stream of substances, courtesy of Johnny himself. He was increasingly paranoid, and by February 20th, he spent the entire night in his kitchen armed with knives, all the lights off, blinds closed, thinking that Michael had hired a hitman to come kill him.
And he only got that thought in his head because of Johnny. Because Johnny had explicitly told him that Michael had been saving up a bunch of money and, according to the informant, finally had enough to hire someone to kill Jacob. Johnny insisted that it was all going down the night of February 20th.
And you might be wondering, why didn't he just go to the police? Well, Johnny told Jacob, you can't go to the police. You're not safe because all my associates know police officers. They're connected to them and to the organization.
And Johnny said that his associates would kill him anyway.
Exactly. There was nowhere for him to run or hide. Now, I'm kind of getting Nick Casotis vibes from this entire Johnny story right now.
And I'm sure you're not the only one, and many of you probably aren't either. Go check out our last video if you want to know what we're talking about. By this time, Jacob was laying out all this information to investigators in that interview room. Hours and hours of stories all spun from the narratives that Johnny had been feeding him, and that's why Jacob went out and bought the firearm on February 22nd. He truly believed he needed to protect himself, and it's also why he told his coworkers he had to quit and leave, because someone was out to kill him. In his mind, this threat was real.
Jacob began to believe his only way out was to kill Michael and Angela. Now he had a gun to do it. And it's no coincidence that on February 25th, the same day he got that gun, Johnny took him to the Kramer's backyard at night, described in detail the entire layout of that house, and told him the best way to get inside was either to kick down a door or break a window. Johnny said, once inside, you have to be committed. Kill Angela, Michael, Jeffrey, and Lori, and make sure they're dead by shooting each one of them in the head. And don't forget to check the rooms upstairs and make sure that no one is hiding in the closets.
Then Johnny instructed Jacob to wear latex gloves underneath a regular cloth pair of black gloves, along with a mask and at least 3 layers of clothing to make himself appear bigger than he really was.
He also provided Jacob with a pair of shoes that were a couple sizes too big, as he watched a little too many episodes of Forensic Files, and they belonged to a friend that left them in Johnny's car. And he was doing this just in case footprints, shoe prints were left behind. Jacob was then told to stuff tissues inside the toe of the shoes so that they wouldn't fall off. That way, any prints left behind would throw off the police because they weren't his size. So he altered his shoe size and the type he owned and his stature. It sounds like a hell of a plan to me.
Johnny also told Jacob to start telling his coworkers that he was leaving for Florida on the 28th, days before the murder would even happen, and to stop using his phone after that date.
That was one of the things Jacob didn't do right, and there were plenty more. After all, he wasn't a real criminal. He wasn't in the organization. He hadn't been initiated. The organization didn't even exist. I think most of you have figured that out. All these lies weaved by Johnny. The plan was for Jacob to stay in the area but not be traceable, carry out the killings at exactly 3 a.m. on March 2nd, and Johnny would be away in a place where surveillance cameras would provide him a solid alibi. It's like he had it all figured out, didn't he?
And that wasn't all. Johnny told Jacob he wasn't the only one of his associates handling witnesses that night. He reminded him about John, the guy whose kids were taken away because of Michael and Angela. According to Johnny, at the very same time Jacob was carrying out his plan, John would be killing the social worker who took his kids. And then at 4 a.m., Johnny himself would be setting out to kill the Kramer cousins who were in a gang to prevent any chance of retaliation if word got out about the Kramer murders.
Not to feel sorry for Jacob at all, but this poor guy could not sleep for days leading up to March 2nd. He was paranoid. He was terrified. He even wrote a note to his family, a goodbye letter, intending on taking his own life, knowing he would never be able to live with what he was going to do. It did include a list of people that Johnny conveniently gave him who were supposedly going to protect Jacob's family. And I kind of felt sad. Like, I was like, this is just all too much. And then he's like, oh, don't worry, these people are going to protect you. And this poor guy's like giving it to his family and going to, take his own life later.
Jacob and Johnny met one last time the night of February 27th, just to make sure everything was still on plan. Then Jacob told investigators that on March 1st, he consumed an excessive amount of substances. So by the early morning hours of March 2nd, just before the killings, he had taken 10 Vicodin, 2 Adderall, Klonopin, and sleep aids.
But I thought to myself, is this an excuse as well? Like, okay, I'm in a zombie state at this point.
It could be, because he said he was so disoriented and felt as though he was dreaming.
That's convenient because we either hear, I blacked out, that's an excuse, or substances. But again, it's like you chose to do whatever you did before you carried these out. And you couldn't have been that messed up because he went to the right house. He broke in the way that he was instructed, according to him. So you can't really be dreaming if you have the wherewithal and the conscious awareness to carry out the crime as you were instructed.
Exactly. But he said, oh, I messed up. I drove to my old apartment instead of the Kramer's home. And then he realized what he was supposed to be doing. Then he drove to the Kramers and said that he was hearing voices and seeing visions of his sister being harmed. So he worked up the courage to go inside because he said, it came in my mind that this is something I had to do to save my family. And I gathered up as much courage as I could and I broke the window.
Courage, or was this the work of a coward? I guess it depends on how much of the story you actually believe. However, at the very least, he told investigators exactly how the murders were carried out and in which order the victims were killed. It had obviously been speculation up until that point, but he said he broke the window with a hammer and that Michael was on the couch and the TV was on and he immediately fired towards that area. Michael ran into the kitchen and that's when Jacob turned and saw Jeffrey, who had come down the stairs. He immediately shot him in the torso. And then right after that, Lori came down the stairs and he got her midway before she could get to the bottom and shot her in the torso as well. And at that point, he started looking for Michael and he found him in the kitchen holding a steak knife. He went right up to him and shot Michael in the torso as well.
And then following Johnny's orders, because remember, Johnny had told him to shoot them all in the head. Jacob shot Michael in the head and then walked over to Jeff and Lori and did the same. He said he even went upstairs to look for Angela, just as he'd been instructed, but he couldn't find her. Johnny had specifically told him to check the closets, but Jacob admitted that he didn't. At that point, he said he knew he had to leave. He quickly ran out of the house, got back into his car,
which he had left running and parked down the street,
and immediately started driving to Florida.
At this point, I feel like he was almost trying to make the investigators believe that he was remorseful and that this was just so intense and he felt so bad about what he did, because he even told them, like, I had to pull over because I needed to vomit. That could have been because you did so many substances, not because you were sick to your stomach. But he said he thought he was dreaming this whole time. And he didn't even know if he carried out the killings. But then he started having all these flashbacks and he looked at his firearm and he realized there was a spent round of ammunition, and that's when he knew he murdered the Kramer family. And that's when he panics. He drives to the back of a restaurant in Indiana, and he goes to a dumpster, puts the handgun, the ammunition, the mask, the shoes, gloves, and his outer layer of clothing inside a black garbage bag, tosses it inside, and continues to Florida. I feel like that is way too much for someone to be in a dreamlike state.
Seriously.
You're going through all these motions. You're getting to your car in time. You even have the thought process to be like, I got to get out of here. I don't have time to check the closet.
I also feel like if he is using so many substances like he's claiming he is, then he's going to be pretty tolerant to those few drugs that he took.
Right. Like at this point, what's his tolerance?
Right.
But then he also told the investigators he dialed 911.
Right. He was panicked. He was convinced that cops were following him. And on that call, he told dispatch that he thought undercover police were harassing him.
It kind of reminds me, I don't remember if it was a cop or just a couple, but they ingested like pot brownies and then they called 911 and they were like freaking out. I don't have all the facts, but this is what it feels like. You're panicked. He's calling 911 basically on himself. But I'm sitting here thinking, well, why didn't they do anything? Did they just think it was a prank or something?
We don't have any additional information, but it does tend to show that he wasn't exactly thinking clearly.
I mean, I can say that, but substances will definitely do that to you. And as you can imagine at this point, after the detectives had heard this whole story, one of the first things they did, because remember, Jacob had said there were 2 other murders that were going to occur that night. Remember, Johnny was going to be killing gang members and John was going to be killing a social worker. So they went and looked for records and none of that happened. Jacob was either lying or Johnny was using this as a tactic to make Jacob feel more comfortable. Like, you're not the only person that's going to be doing something illegal that night. And it seemed to be the latter. It seemed like Johnny was this manipulative mastermind behind this entire plot. He saw a vulnerable person that he could use as a pawn in his nasty, twisted plan to get rid of the mother of his baby and possibly her brother and family, so that they didn't have to deal with them and they didn't get custody of his son.
Once detectives told Jacob that he was the only one that committed the murders that night, it all started to come together. He 100%, in the detective's perspective, believed that everything Johnny told him was true.
And with that being said, they only had 12 hours before they had to release Johnny. So they're thinking, well, at least we have him in custody. And with all this evidence that they had, and it all matched up to the story that Jacob had told them, and they even retrieved the gun. They got so lucky that dumpster in Indiana, along with, everything that was inside, the garbage bag, the clothing, the shoes, they were able to get it before it went to the landfill. So now they matched it up and it matched the casings and the bullets that were left behind. And they're able to keep Johnny in custody because now they have probable cause to get an arrest warrant, hoping that now he's going to come clean.
Especially with all that evidence stacked against him, investigators thought that Johnny would eventually crack. But he stayed silent, So they came up with a plan. They placed Jacob in a jail cell right next to Johnny's. What neither of them knew was that the cells were equipped with hidden audio recording devices, and every word between them was being captured.
I was actually ignorant to this. I did not know, I don't know if this is unusual or not, or special circumstance, but I didn't know that they had recordings inside jail cells.
I mean, why wouldn't they?
Well, I don't think they're allowed in every state. That's the thing.
I don't know about every state, but that's the law in Illinois.
I had never seen that before, but it's so smart. Like, why wouldn't you? Because all these informants come forward and they're like, ooh, like in the Donna Adelson case and
That's what
whatnot.
I'm saying.
I know, like, why didn't you just have microphones in there? But anyway, Johnny goes right back to his manipulation. And it just proves that Jacob's story was true because Johnny starts asking him all kinds of questions, just pressing him. Where did you throw things? Where's the evidence? Where's the gun? Trying to make sure that his little accomplice did everything right.
But it didn't stop there. Johnny started threatening Jacob from that adjoining jail cell. He told him that he knew people inside, that he had connections with gang members, and that he was about to get out. He warned Jacob that if he went against him, people would hurt him while he was still locked up. It was all an attempt to scare him into silence. And this was all the investigators needed to formally charge Johnny. And on March 6th of 2010, he was hit with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of solicitation to commit murder, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. The DuPage County District Attorney said it plainly. Johnny Borisov had used Jacob Nadarcy as a weapon in his senseless murder.
Investigators started to notice similarities between Angela's relationship with Johnny and Johnny's relationship with Jacob. Like Angela, Johnny isolated Jacob from all of his friends and his family. He provided him with things and a place to stay and made Jacob dependent on him. And since Johnny was in charge, Jacob began to have no choice but to follow through on whatever Johnny asked of him, even murder. Johnny had such a powerful influence over Jacob that he manipulated him into believing that murdering Angela and her family was the only way to stay alive. But 3 people had to die, and it finally was time to lay them to rest.
Hundreds of family, friends, and loved ones, and even strangers gathered at the church at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Darien to say their final goodbyes. The 3 caskets were simple and identical, lined up side by side, with the only difference being the flowers resting gently on top of each one.
A deep red bouquet for 50-year-old Jeffrey, a soft pink arrangement for his wife Lori, and in the middle, a white spray of flowers placed carefully alongside a White Sox cap.
It was like one last gesture of loyalty to the team that he loved.
Exactly.
Then at Mount Auburn Memorial Park, everyone gathered around the 3 caskets, their faces streaked with tears and their voices breaking as they said their goodbyes to a family taken from them in the most brutal way. It wasn't just a funeral, it was a collective grief of an entire community struggling to understand how much violence could shatter the peace and quiet of Darien.
It wasn't even until April 19th of 2013 that Johnny faced trial. Now, Jacob had already cooperated with law enforcement. He took a plea deal, 75 years in prison. But Johnny, he was still maintaining his innocence. He kind of took a page out of Charlie Adelson's playbook, and he was saying, oh, I had nothing to do with this. Jacob, he was the one that wanted to take care of my little problem because he was so loyal to me, because he knew how bad this family was treating me. And it was true that Jacob did have mental health concerns that dated back all the way to when he was a child. And there was a full psychological evaluation done on him. He was diagnosed with bipolar, major depressive episodes, and severe mood disorder. But one clinical psychologist, Dr. John Murray, who interviewed him 10 different times and reviewed all of the interviews that Jacob did with law enforcement, said, in his opinion, he believed that he could have been going into psychosis when the murders occurred. But he also said it wasn't severe enough that Jacob would not be responsible for his actions. No wonder he took a plea deal, because insanity was going to be off the table.
During the trial where Jacob testified on behalf of the state, Johnny's defense attorney came at him hard. He pressed Jacob on the fact that he was the one who pulled the trigger, that he was the one who chose to break into that house, and that he was the one who decided that his family's lives were more important than the Kramers. And Jacob agreed, but he added, right, but I did it for a reason. Johnny. This evidence was overwhelming, especially with the survivors and others testifying about the hatred that Johnny had toward Angela and her family. Jacob had no motive of his own, no reason to kill the Kramers other than the lies and manipulation that Johnny had used to push him into doing it.
Johnny's defense tried to paint it like Jacob was insane and that this crazy substance-induced manic episode caused him to act completely alone, but the evidence didn't add up. And for what? I was thinking like for a custody of a child, you're killing the mother, you're killing the grandparents, the entire family. And I'm just always like, make it make sense. But you can't get into a killer's mindset. It's a child that he created with this other person, but it's okay that he wants to kill her. And then what's going to happen if that child grew up and he gets away with it, let's just say? Aren't you going to see that person in their eyes? Aren't you going to see it? Because most kids resemble their parents, right? So the child would grow up and eventually be looking at them and be reminded of the parent you took away. I don't know. That's what I always go to. I know I can't get into the mind of a killer.
Right. It blows my mind that, these men want their kids, but then they end up trying to erase their mother and family who love them.
Exactly. That's what I don't understand.
And even if they got away with it, what would their relationship look like, right?
Yeah, because let's say that they even bought the story of, oh, this crazed maniac and this and that. They're still harmed. You're taking away a child's parent. They're not going to grow up the same as they would if their parent was there.
And every time you look at that child, you're going to see the person that you destroyed.
That's my whole thought, is just how. But it's not rational. And in the end, all of the testimony, all of the threats that Johnny had made over and over again about how he wanted this family dead in body bags, and as much as he hated them, nobody else had ever made threats like that. Nobody else had a motive like he did. And Johnny Borisov was found guilty of all charges. He received a sentence of natural life in prison.
Another thing we found interesting, and we've noticed this in other cases too, is that family members of killers don't always see them the same way as victims and survivors do. For example, Johnny's mother, Christina, was pleading with the public back in 2021 to save Johnny's life while he was in prison because he was dealing with major health concerns.
Right. He was, according to her, gravely ill, and she was trying to get publicity, and she reached out to Visible magazine, and they allowed her to be interviewed.
She didn't want to get into the details of his conviction, but instead she wanted to talk about his health concern.
Exactly. She wanted to use this time to explain that he was suffering from kidney failure.
Because according to doctors, he only had 3 to 5 years left to live, and maybe less, because he needed a transplant.
Right then, he was still surviving because of dialysis. But you know what's interesting? If he had not been the person he was, and all of this had happened to him and he was in prison, maybe he would have gotten that transplant. But to be begging for a person who conspired to kill an entire family for help at this point, right? It's ironic, and it's too bad. You have to live with your sentence, and that means if you only have 3 to 5 years to live because of your health concerns, I guess that's what's going to happen in prison.
Johnny's mom also mentioned that the conditions inside Stateville Correctional Center, a maximum security prison in Illinois, were inhumane and making his health decline even worse. She even shared a story from 2017 where Johnny was in a diabetic shock and was allegedly attacked by a prison nurse. According to her, another nurse just stood there and told him, "I hope you die."
Again, I can't necessarily blame someone, this nurse, for not feeling sorry for him. But here's his mom arguing that her son had shown exemplary behavior in prison, that he was no threat to society anymore, and now she wants him out. And I'm thinking,
how do you know that?
Right. How do you know he's not a threat?
Yeah.
And of course, he's going to be on his best behavior because he's hoping that one day he's possibly going to be paroled.
Her request wasn't for a retrial or an appeal. It was for clemency.
But she was begging the governor, saying you have the power to keep him from dying behind bars. But unfortunately, the petitions were denied, and he's still in Statesville prison, and he's still undergoing dialysis. And I was thinking to myself, well, at least he's getting medical care, and he is still waiting for a transplant. But there is this empathetic side of me, even though I'm not trying to be sympathetic to a killer. But then all of a sudden, just snap back in reality. I'm like, wait a minute. No, he killed a family. But I do go back and forth where I'm like, oh, he's like getting dialysis and he's sick. But I'm like, no, no, he's human, but he's not human, because a real human person doesn't do that to someone else. Well, we're not just talking about a human that's suffering. We're talking about someone who put into motion 3 innocent people being annihilated in their own home in the middle of the night, never to see their family members again, never to breathe again. So I don't have sympathy. But I do want to say I feel sorry for the Kramer family and to the survivors, Angela and Anthony and Nicholas. I do hope that there is some way that you can move forward. And I wasn't able to find much about them. I'm sure they keep a very low profile, but I'm hoping that they are thriving as best as they can. And thank you so much. And we will see you in our next video. Bye.